Hey everyone, Realme has always been well known for their budget and mid-range phones, which have insane value for money. Now they're finally entering the flagship part of the market. Their latest device has a 90Hz display, insane fast charging, a flagship chipset, 4 cameras on the back. Really, this thing packs a punch. So, should you get it? I'm Angie for GSM Marina, and this is our review of the Realme X2 Pro. Looks-wise, the X2 Pro is nice, but honestly, it doesn't stand out. It has a minimalistic design and a clean camera setup on the back. You'll find an awkward Realme logo placed next to the cameras, but other than that, it's just a clean Neptune blue, which is how they call this style. Turn it around and you'll find a small water droplet notch on the top that's easy to ignore and an optical fingerprint reader under the display. It's one of the best under-display readers we've used, and it works quickly and reliably. There's also a face unlock option if you prefer it. The phone is made of Gorilla Glass 5 on the front and back, and it has an aluminum frame. The bulk and weight makes it feel sturdy and slightly detract from the flagship feel, but remember, this is a phone for €400, not $700. It's a little wide to be totally comfortable for one-handed use, but ColorOS 6.1 sports gestures, so single-handed navigation isn't impossible. Of course, if you don't like gestures, you can always switch back to navigation buttons and even rearrange them to your liking. Speaking of buttons, the volume buttons are clicky and there's a yellow accent on the power button. So onto the display, which is probably one of the best in this price segment. The phone sports a 6.5-inch Super AMOLED display with Full HD resolution. It's actually probably the same panel as the OnePlus 7T, and it even supports the HDR10 Plus standard, but the test results we got differed due to the controller. It got 500 nits of brightness in manual and 708 in auto mode. While less than the OnePlus 7T, it was impressive all the same. Color accuracy wasn't amazing, and the best we got was in gentle mode. Whites were still a little blue though. The display has a few nice options like Night Shield for late night reading and a system-wide dark mode that works pretty well with apps like Gmail and Google Play. The phone is on Pi, so it's a custom implementation that's quite clever in how well it works to invert white elements to dark ones. But really, the most amazing feature of the screen is the 90Hz refresh rate. You have the option to switch it to 60Hz, but the battery life is more than good enough, and the 90Hz option makes the phone feel time smoother. Also, the software automatically reverts back to 60Hz when you're watching regular videos or viewing static content. Actually, even when you have the 90Hz refresh rate turned on, the phone has a pretty good endurance rating of 94 hours thanks to the 4000 mAh battery. Even if it didn't last too long, its 50-watt fast charging is amazing, and it charged from 0 to 100% in 30 minutes. It got a little hot, so the longevity of the battery is questionable, but if you're wary, you can switch off the quick charge to a regular 18-watt charger and still get some form of fast charging. As far as the other side of media consumption goes, in other words, the audio, the Realme stereo loudspeakers had impressive loudness and good quality. There isn't much bass, but that's not too surprising considering this is a phone. Our readers are wondering whether the phone supports the protocol to stream Netflix in HD, and it does. At the bottom of the phone, you'll find a headphone jack, and its performance was similar to that of other Realme phones we've tested. That is to say, good enough as long as you're not sporting some audiophile headphones. The Realme sports ColorOS 6.1 based on Android Pie. We're hoping Realme updates it to Android 10 soon, since almost 2 months have passed since Google released it. This is not what you'd call a minimalistic UI, and you find a ton of features here. There's a battery menu with power-saving options, screen-off gestures, and a smart bar that appears when you swipe from the right bezel. One of the most curious options that ColorOS gives you is control over app startup and closing animation speed. You can make your phone even snappier, and I really have no idea why you'd leave this setting at slow, but I guess everyone has their preference. Even if you set everything to slow, however, this phone is plenty fast. It sports the latest Snapdragon 855 Plus, and it performs on par with the competition. So far, the phone seems amazing. However, flagship killers usually have a weak spot when it comes to cameras. So let's see about this one. So the Realme X2 Pro has a quad camera setup, but really it's more like 3 cameras because one of them is a depth sensor, so that doesn't really count. The main camera has a 64 megapixel sensor that outputs 16 megapixel images. The 13 megapixel telephoto has an f2.5 aperture, and the ultra wide is an 8 megapixel one with an f2.2 aperture. In daylight, images had impressive levels of detail and good dynamic range. When you zoom in, however, there are some over-sharpened straight lines, and there's some noise in areas that had uniform color. Speaking of color, it looks natural, but you can increase the saturation with Chroma Boost if that's more to your taste. Portraits were excellent, and we can easily say that these are some of the best portraits around. Just know that the bokeh slider is set at 60% by default, and the more aggressive you get with the background blur, the more mistakes the software makes. The telephoto seemed to do a pretty great job. Rendering was quite similar to the main cameras, although some highlights were clipped, and there's more general softness in some of the images. The ultra-wide lens was more of a mixed bag and had satisfactory levels of detail, but it's not impressive by any means. Exposure was a little inconsistent and colors were duller than the main cams. There's a dedicated macro mode that uses the ultra-wide snapper. There's some distortion, but detail is excellent and the autofocus is fast, and the phone generally did a pretty good job. In low light, the main cam had impressive dynamic range even without nightscape. There was some noise, but detail was excellent and colors were punchy. Nightscape was actually more of a mixed bag. Colors were boosted and highlights and shadows were restored, but if you really zoom into the pictures, you'll notice over-sharpening and details that seem to be rendered out of thin air. The ultra-wide camera struggles more, and images were still soft and noisy. This camera definitely benefits more from nightscape, and images came out much better looking and much sharper than without it. If you're more into selfies, the 60-megapixel front does a pretty good job even without autofocus. Photos are detailed with a wide dynamic range and natural-looking skin tones. HDR worked pretty effectively, and even more surprisingly, Realme has added the night mode to the front cam. Photos look like they're taken with the flash on, and skin tones look surprisingly natural. In terms of video, the Realme can record 4K at up to 60 FPS and Full HD at up to 120 FPS. 4K videos look really nice, and we were hard-pressed to find any issues, aside from the slightly clipped highlights on some white buildings. Stabilization was quite effective, but of course it was times better in Full HD. Speaking of which, 1080p videos were just as good, although there was a loss of detail compared to 4K footage. The ultra-wide camera can only record in Full HD, and it was unimpressive, and the dynamic range wasn't as good as on the main cam. The telephoto camera is also limited to Full HD, and here we weren't particularly impressed with the detail. So one of the best things about the Realme X2 Pro is that it's actually available in Europe, and you can buy the phone through the Realme website. This is a change from Realme phones in the past, which were usually only available in Asia. Now, if you can live with the good but not spectacular quad camera setup, this phone offers a lot. It has that 90Hz display, insane fast charging, good battery life, flagship chipset, and a bunch of other stuff. And this combination makes it one of the best phones to get at its price. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button down below, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you guys next time.